I think we ended up having this classroom-based system when we entered into mass education, when there were a large number of young people who needed to educate. It was the easy way to organize, put people in smaller groups and then give one adult and one classroom for them to work on, and that's how it grew.
Especially when compulsory education came, it was also just very convenient to be able to have all those students together with one teacher in a classroom. We've shifted from individual education to classroom education. It's still understandable as something that fits when providing education to all people.
In an industry that was booming that time, the same principles were used in an industry as well, in a production, in a factory, that people were producing human products almost as they were producing bricks in a factory. So it was the mental model and thinking was exactly the same way.
The accusation is often that it is industrial. Yes, that's actually true. You simply process a lot of children in a relatively short time in large groups. And that is the way, yes, you can negotiate all kinds of things there, no matter the situation or the circumstances that may arise. Look, ultimately that system, it is the face, the appearance of the educational institution.
During that period, you had primary education and you had secondary education. That was what it was. So you had education for the masses and you had education for the elite.
In many parts of Europe, there were Latin schools, which were for the elite. They were also not intended for those schools, so to speak, to train for a profession. And you didn't have to learn anything there that you would need later. You only had to learn something there that could show that you belonged to the elite.
And for the rest, what is in between, that was much more regulated by private initiatives. So vocational education that just became, yes, they just went to learn from someone, for example.
The education was something that we do here right now. That it was conversation often between the master and the student, or a master and small number of students.
I think if you look at history, the first moment that mass education became classroom-based, then we must look back at Prussia in the early 19th century.
We had very ambitious educational innovations, and one of the ideas included was that you had to give classroom teaching, so children neatly in rows, all looking at that board, which was also an innovation at the time, all looking at the board and at that teacher who made those lessons and gave very teacher-driven education.
The definition was knowledge elevates man. And what they did then they fragmented the knowledge, chopped it into pieces.
The innovators of that era embraced and transformed it into a highly rigorous, systematic education, but also in a very systematic manner, starting from small pieces and then guiding the students completely by the hand.
Subjects are often taught in isolation of each other, so you chemistry, biology and such like. You look at a timetable and you can see those words actually in the timetable, all subjects separated as though that's the way that they are. But in reality, that's not the way the world works, because when you walk outside, you don't see chemistry over here and biology over here, social subjects down here. You encounter the world as it is, as it presents itself to you.
Then an education system was set up in Prussia to meet the needs of the Prussian dictatorship. Prussia needed obedient soldiers, workers, and officials.
Der Zweck der Erziehung besteht darin, den Kindern den freien Willen zu nehmen, um es für den Rest ihres Lebens unmöglich zu machen, anders zu denken oder sich anders zu verhalten, als es ihre Lehrer beendet haben.
So you do indeed want people to be loyal citizens. That was also very explicitly stated in the Education Law of 1806.
It is not necessarily meant to be obedient, but the side effect of thinking about learning and development in this way is that it makes people very passive. That leads to obedient individuals.
If you just stay still and don't make any trouble in the classroom and you look like you're studying, the teacher is usually happy. And if you go through the school system or everything you just know about is, okay, now I just stay still and I do the stuff the teacher asks and everybody's happy, I'm making the teacher happy, and try to break that system.
The possibilities for disruption, I think, are central to very good pedagogy or very good teaching and learning. We need disruption, whereas it seems that a lot of education that takes place in a class, the purpose of that is to avoid disruption, to maintain a sort of teaching and learning process that is essentially about the teacher teaching and the learners learning.
I believe I am part of the group of employees who, when there is a particularly crazy idea, I have a tendency to go along with the idea and support it enthusiastically. Kids and youth just have ideas that I am no longer able to generate, whereas we grown-ups occasionally find ourselves in a rut. And the most fascinating aspect is discovering that a completely contrasting viewpoint from your own can also be remarkably effective. At the same time, I know that my role as an adult at this school is not to have my ideas realized, but rather that it should be the ideas of the students that have space here.
The instruction is conducted in a manner that enables you to genuinely transform into a specific, precise citizen through the teaching techniques utilized throughout the process of education. That is a little bit the essence, the fundamental aspect that lies at the heart of the matter.
It comes with the discipline. Sometimes it comes with the order, trying to educate people who will not disturb or challenge the current state of issues in any system or government.
The word is out, for sure, that the system that we've been following now for many years is not actually successful in terms of creating human beings who have a capacity for flexibility, incredible kind of incisive thinking, goal setting, and just a sort of autonomy of spirit that is going to help children to feel that they own their own learning, that learning is something they love and they want to do over and over again. It's not something confined to school, it's not something dependent on an external person, and it's actually endless and fascinating.
What they become incredibly good at is being a student. But being a student means waiting until you receive an assignment, then you do that assignment. And you don't do anything more than that assignment. So you lose all your creativity, you lose your initiative, you lose your motivation, because it's only about achieving something that is asked of you at a certain moment.
At the beginning, we always notice that a student needs to unlearn a little. That is very used to tell me what I have to do. And we really invest a lot of time in that in the beginning to unlearn that. And that you can really do. Find out what that student really wants. Instead, tell the student what to do. So that piece of uneducation is indeed an important part of that. And what is also a very nice process. Because then they realize, hey, I can do and have a lot. As long as it fits within the safety, then there is just a lot possible. If they find out, it's cool to see how the students get started and what they come up with.
Well, the most important thing, and that's the basis for Kunskapskolan, is that we strongly believe that all people are different. We learn in different ways, at different paces, and that the traditional school was not catered to allow personalization. With the current structures, the schedules, the premises, they were not aligned to deliver personalized education. Well, the main approach with our personalized education is to ensure that students can progress at their own pace as much as possible, and that can be different in different subjects, of course, so that the students' individual starting point, that's where we start. And the relationship building that we're creating with the various coaching sessions and how the school is organized.
What I have observed is that your imagination and creativity have been completely destroyed. You are constantly engrossed in books and you consistently have to adhere to the instructions and demands of others at school. You have an extremely minimal say in determining your wants and actions. Every aspect of your life is predetermined, leaving no room for autonomy. I strongly emphasize the significance of this lack of control over one's own choices and decisions.
It's an important fact in the general human nature to be given autonomy, that what you do and at what pace. And because I think that's what motivates me as a teacher, I try to give that feeling also for the students. I think it's an important fact to get the students to feel that they actually have a say in the classroom.
Traditionally, there were 3 groups in society that did not have their freedom rights, and these groups were slaves, women, and children. In the 19th century, slavery was abolished. In the 20th century, women have gained most of their rights. Maybe it's time in the 21st century to give kids their rights too.
It was approximately during the 3rd grade that I started to move on from the lower years, and it started to become a bit more challenging for me. I planned a lot. Specifically, I want to do this from 7 to 7:30, and then from 7:30 to 8. It was very specific, very planned. I always had all my days completely planned. Ultimately, due to requiring additional time for comprehension, I lagged behind my predetermined timetable once more. Consequently, I spent that particular year in the 4th, 5th, and ultimately the 6th grade. Then I even woke up at 7 a.m. on weekends to study, and I didn't stop until 10 p.m. without breaks. That was 7 days a week, just the whole school year.
And we make those new people, the young children, believe that they have to learn a lot before they can live like us. And what we instruct them is all cognitively charged, and it is all about recalling things. And that does not even have much to do with the process of learning, but only by attempting to remember things in our memory. That is so bizarre. Actually, when you think about it, that's so bizarre.
Children aged 5, 16 in the Netherlands must attend school. If not, parents can contact the criminal judge under compulsory education law. So you must send your child to school. That is the protection of the child's rights, compulsory education. In previous times, parents would keep children at home and give them responsibilities for household chores or looking after their younger siblings. Compulsory education law serves a good purpose.
But most students don't have to be afraid at all that they have to work at the age of 8 or 9 or 10. They are just sitting in the back seat. They are driven everywhere. And then compulsory education becomes something that you can only make meaningful if you really organize education very differently.
I need to go to school. I have mandatory education, so I must be in class every day, every hour. While you may actually be smart enough or smart enough, I don't really want to call it that, but just independent, that's actually what I mean, called independent. Surround me with the book. Just let me sit. Just let me sit, study, and I'll pass that test, without being simply obliged to attend every class. That is skipped in education, I think.
Schola, the Greek word for leisure, where compulsory education was, as it were, a duty for parents to bring the child during that free time where it could do something and practice without being held accountable, has now been established as compulsory education, established as a burden of learning. They keep sitting in those school buildings while they can do all sorts of things a long time ago.
Numerous schools utilize such a system. Each hour, you are assigned a distinct subject to study, ensuring a varied and comprehensive educational experience. Well, that is naturally subject to variation, something that many young individuals actually find difficult to handle or deal with. And then this, and then that, and then that.
Instruction, 45-minute intervals, breaks, and you are not allowed to drink anything. At that time, it was probably worse at private schools. Children were afraid to drink again in education and such matters.
In my experience, children can't concentrate from 8:30 to 4 p.m. It's way too long for primary children.
Ready? Yeah, ready. Oliko joku vitsi, mitä ette parin kanssa ymmärtänyt?
In Finland, we don't have the same time all over. Every school has different timetables. Like for example, in our school, we start 8:15. And maximum is at 2 o'clock, 2 p.m. latest they'll stop. But like my students, second graders, 8-year-olds, the first ones go home already this time, 11:15, and then the rest of the class, like half of the class, 1:15.
In secondary school, they'll have longer days, but even there, I think it's horror if they have 8 lessons per day.
The longer the day is, it doesn't make it more effective, because the children, they're quite short-tempered, and they don't have the ability to work like for 8 hours. So we have pushed it shorter, but we try to be more effective.
I had that. I fell asleep in class without realizing it. In the middle of a course, I fell away. I drifted off in a slumber, completely unaware of the time that has passed.
And then I woke up and I had no idea that it had even happened. I fell asleep. I was just always super tired, super irritated. My grades went down because despite sitting so much at school, it didn't work.
We think that children need to play, they need to be outside, they need to have hobbies, they need to do sports. So I don't think that they learn any better if they stayed at the desk any longer.
It had become overwhelming, so my grades dropped. That was the initial focus of their attention. And then dozing off and falling asleep in class. It was only at that moment that the bell started to ring a little bit. They started to realize that something had to be done.
How do you judge a child who has tried and worked incredibly hard and by the formal system gets an E or a minus, and a child who's hardly worked at all and by the formal system gets an A?
If someone said they studied for 1 day before the test week, I studied for 7 days. That was the case from the beginning. It was definitely a bit more difficult for me to keep up. But starting from the 3rd grade, I really had to exert much more effort.
It tells the child who's tried really hard not to bother. It tells the child who doesn't really have to try very hard at all, they don't have to try very hard. That's a very strange way of testing people. And I do think that is condemning. It condemns effort. It limits possibilities because the child who gets an A thinks they might as well just carry on as they are, whereas perhaps they could do so much more than they're doing at that moment. It's outdated.
The majority of my lessons are highly repressive. You're in a classroom environment. You spend a lot of time reading from various books. Regarding the rest, there isn't much to do. It's extremely monotonous and lacks any form of mental stimulation. And then you end up in a vicious cycle at some point. The more mind-numbing activities, the less creativity or imagination you have, and the less time you have for other things.
Nowadays, students have quite a lot of other things going on than just the school system. So if I, for example, give that you need to have this homework done by tomorrow, some of the students have football practices, gymnastic practices, etc. So it would be impossible for them to actually do the homework probably. So I give them quite a lot of freedom to choose when they actually have the time to do the assignments given on the course. So quite a lot of freedom is given for the students, but it comes with a responsibility. They are responsible for themselves to actually learn and be interested in learning the topic.
If I had studied for 2 weeks and got a 6, and someone else had studied for 2 days and got a 9, I always found it very difficult to accept, and that motivated me to keep studying even longer. I desired to please the teachers, I desired to maintain pace with the remaining students in my class.
So it's a bit of a dirty circle that's hard to get out of. I always described it as a bubble that you are in within the education system that you never really get out of.
Some young individuals experience a deep sense of failure when, for example, they don't understand a subject well or get a low grade. They also have concentration problems, struggling to concentrate or keep up. They face setbacks, and the mountain of challenges they encounter is getting higher. That overwhelming feeling of failure, once again in comparison to other students, they have the ability to do it, but I am unable to accomplish the same.
There is no higher or lower level. It only exists at your level. So everyone is bothered by mayonnaise and brains, without exception. And detoxing means detoxifying that thought process. That you do not allow yourself to be guided by that thought process.
In pre-university education, you're essentially just memorizing pointless things. While you do develop a certain way of thinking, the content primarily consists of factual information. I believe that time would be better spent learning how to obtain insurance, as I have to rely on my parents for that knowledge. Simply teach us how to take care of ourselves, life skills, instead of just making us memorize formulas without understanding their practical applications.
We have the same curriculum that all other schools in Sweden, so we can't do anything outside that, but we put extra time on life skills. It can be planning, that we are coaching them to plan, because that's really a life skill that you need for both when you're a grown-up and you have a job and with higher studies like in university, and talking and respect from each other. A lot of these group sessions that we have are not in the same class. So you also learn how to cope with different people. Even it doesn't always have to be with the ones that you choose or that you actually like. And how do you do when you have to work or cooperate with someone that you don't know?
A school should be much more focused on that, a kind of a genuine and authentic school for life. That concept which needs to be much more present in our discussions.
At first I managed to keep up a bit, that strict schedule I had made myself. But by the end of the 3rd grade, it was getting worse. especially when I did that in the 4th year too. In the 5th, at the end of the year, I held on, but I was already exhausted during summer break. I was always irritated, extremely tired. I could barely stand up when I had walked for a total of 10 minutes. Still, I wanted to keep going. Didn't want to accept I couldn't continue, because I had to and would do it myself.
A significant number of burnouts, individuals who are overworked, anxieties, panic attacks, depressions, feeling down, experiencing a sense of despair. It merely relies on the specific whereabouts of a child.
What are the reasons behind the high prevalence of burnout among many young people? I believe this can be attributed to the lack of emphasis on nurturing personality development in both primary and secondary education systems. In my publication, I refer to it as child abuse, and I stress in the written content too that I genuinely regard it as child abuse. The development of the will, so the development of the motivation of what am I going for now, what do I stand for, that we ignore that piece in education.
We have health education, for example, in the Finnish curriculum. There's only one mandatory course on health education. There could be a discussion, should we have more mandatory courses on health education regarding, for example, these mental health issues.
At a certain point, it no longer worked. Whatever I tried to do, the material didn't go in. I couldn't study well anymore. My grades went down significantly. I was just always tired. I was less present at school because I just couldn't do it anymore. When at last the teachers and my father rang the bell, finally signaling the end of the day. I was mentally completely exhausted. I couldn't even think anymore. All I could do was cry and sleep.
If we think our working culture, it's rather democratic. I mean, you are not forced to exercise a certain kind of job. So how come we need to define how people should be or what they should do or learn between the age of 7 to 18 or 5 to 18?
You should primarily do what is said, written in books. You should definitely not deviate from that. When taking a test or writing an essay, always adhere to a list of, for instance, 8 points. If you do not possess the aforementioned 8 points, and if you carried out the task in a manner that differs from the prescribed method, you will incur a deduction of points. In terms of languages, that is striking. Then you have to write an essay in French, for example, and then you have a list of points, for example, 200 words. And if you have additional words, and you made errors in them, that is also considered a deduction. So that means that the more words you write, the more chances you have to make mistakes, the more will be deducted. While you may have written a very nice story in terms of content, and a much better story than someone who, for example, has written 200 words and has been grammatically correct, but then you have a lower grade even though your content was better than the person who wrote it grammatically correct, so technically they did well, but somewhat less substantive. And I think that's a skewed ratio, because you're in pre-university education, you would think it's about the content of what you write down and what you think, and not whether it is technically good or less good.
Feeling somehow that there is only one right answer. Well, we all know that's pretty much never the case. There are always multiple answers that have merit, and sometimes not so much merit. And again, the value in putting forward an idea that isn't considered the only idea is that there is discussion and thoughtfulness and an appreciation that there are many opinions, many ways of looking at things, which create in us tolerance. That my idea isn't the only right idea, that listening to other people's ideas can change my ideas, and that understanding that life is going to be full of challenges, of ideas, and of meeting together with others who have different challenges and different ideas.
Because the average student now may not have any ideas. That's in that stream that the teacher says you have to learn this and this. Then you are also not allowed to ask, why do I have to learn this? Because people determine that when they establish the curriculum. However, this is followed by the fact that you have a system that is somewhat more affectionate than it was 50 years ago, because at that time you could still be subjected to physical punishment if you didn't comply with the instructions of the teacher. However, the system remains fundamentally unchanged.
The essence of regular education is actually just doing what others tell you to do for 14 years.
Over a span of 2 decades, from the age of 4 to 24, you endure a minimum of 2 decades behind bars, which we refer to as an educational institution.
In the end, I stayed home for about a year, a full school year. At the start of the fall break, in my last year of high school, I quit. Initially, the plan was for me to resume half of my courses that year after the Christmas break. But I attempted it, and within a week, I quickly realized that it was not going to be successful. It didn't work, so in the end, I stayed home for the entire school year. And that was mainly spent on sleeping. Especially the first 4 months, sleeping was the main thing, and I would wake up to eat and then go back to sleep. When I had a little more energy, that sometimes became a walk around. But then I had to recover for 2 days again. So I think the heavy recovery took a year, but the 2 years after that, I still had to recover. That is something that goes slowly.
Do you know what I find incredibly miraculous? I am frequently employed by universities and colleges to offer help to those students who are striving to enhance their learning abilities. I find that strange. I enjoy doing it, and I really like doing it, and I have done it a lot, but I find it peculiar that those educational institutions do not pick up on it themselves. How they can help their students, how they can learn faster and better, how they can make it more fun, how they can motivate those people, how they can concentrate better, how they can learn fast learning techniques. Well, I find that really strange.
In the curricula, we are still stuck with the idea that one has to learn things. And it's not really about how to learn. How can I even distinguish what is a valid source and what may not be? And all of these things, which have actually become more significant than ever, particularly with the internet, without a doubt. So how can I filter information to determine if it is important to me, and if it has at least a kernel of truth, or if it is completely made up, or if I have no idea whatsoever?
We're still somehow trapped into large-scale educational systems wanting constantly to prove to itself that it's working, and therefore putting children into situations, and if I may say teachers, into situations that actually create problems within the whole system.
I always thought, you must achieve the highest possible. You want to earn money, you want to have a good job. Well, then you have to go to university. That's what you want to do. You want to study something in science. But in the end, my interests have never lied there. Not my entire life. I merely manipulated myself to a small degree. In the realm of pre-university education, I believe it is necessary for me to engage in this behavior in order to attain a more favorable position within society, garner additional respect from individuals, and be more readily understood by others.
And the more you strengthen your diplomas by building on the reproduction of knowledge that you can retrieve from your memory, the less suitable you actually become for the demands and expectations of society.
If the school system rewards them, if there are good students, so to speak, they get good grades, they get to the university, they get a degree from the university, and what's that after that? It's really unknown. They don't know if it pays off for them. And so I think that's also one of the reasons of this mental health issue, because the society is changing so fast.
But actually, all those 8 years of working so hard and just completely breaking myself physically and mentally for nothing.
When I wrote my book, Beyond Compulsory Education, that title was chosen very consciously because I noticed when I was writing it that all problems in education can be traced back to coercion. Every education system is good if children choose and want it for their own learning.
I think this school is different in the way that we have the traditional classroom, but at the same time we have the open learning space. And it's the mix of the traditional classroom and the open learning space that makes it unique.
It seems to me that our educational systems seem to treat all places as though they were the same. You learn things that it doesn't really matter where you are. So I guess what I'm trying to do is reverse that notion to say that each place is different.
If you want to really enjoy the healing power of the earth, you can't be in a room with a floor and cement underneath. You have to go right out there and feel it.
The core of subway education is, which doesn't even have to do with the school, that we consider children as full-fledged people. And if you just treat children with respect, they will also behave very responsibly.
And parents who also give permission for their child to have these experiences, I say, trust your child to live their life.
If you have to describe Agora to someone who is not familiar with Agora, then that is a way in which suitable assignments are searched for together with the child in order to ensure a comprehensive understanding of the subject matter. That fit the child, but also bring them in a meaningful context. I think meaningful work is the key to tapping into intrinsic motivation.
In a Finnish culture, the teachers are highly valued, and basically all the parents are trusting the teacher. And we have really autonomous system. So basically the teacher can decide how to teach, what to teach.
His vision was to allow children to make choices for themselves and live their own lives and not to have to just follow an academic route. I mean, remember, my father was a Victorian. He was born in 1883. So he was he came from a very, very rigid system in Scotland, very repressive. You got beaten.